folks, let's solve this inequality and use interval notation for our end game answer. So I can see it's a quadratic inequality. I've got no fractions here, right? No fractions, no radicals, no logarithms. That's great. So what I really am going to do is I'm going to rewrite this with 18x squared equal to 17x plus 1 and solve this quadratic equation, right? And I should get two roots, and then I'll use those roots to create a sign pattern. And if I have a quadratic equation, you can solve this by factoring if it's possible. The quadratic formula, which will always work if you want to do it that way, or you could complete the square. I typically go with either factoring or use the quadratic formula. And if I'm using either of those two methods, I need to set my equation to 0. So I'm going to subtract 17x from both sides, and I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, and then I'll get that 0 that I'm looking for. And I can actually, I can factor this. I can think of two numbers that multiply to 18 and add to negative 17. So I'm going to have an 18x and an x, and then I'm going to have a 1 and a 1. And if I want minus 17, I'm going to put the minus sign here and the plus sign here. And if you don't like this, right, if you struggle with fractions, not fractions, well that too, but if you struggle with factoring, you can always use the quadratic formula. So if you wanted to, you can let a equal 18, b equal negative 17, c equal negative 1, and then you can run the quadratic formula. Oops, and I'm just seeing you can't quite see the edge of that. Let me scooch this a little to my left. So you could do that if you feel more comfortable that way. I'm going to factor because I can. And I don't mean because I can in a braggy way. I mean because it's actually possible. Sometimes there's quadratic equations that you can't factor and you have to use the quadratic formula. But I'm going to get either 18x plus 1 is 0 or x minus 1 is 0. And when I solve both of those for x, I'm going to get x equaling negative 1 over 18 or x equaling 1. Those are going to be my two roots. And that's what I'm going to place on my sign pattern. So let me go ahead and make my smushed x-axis, my smushed xy-axis really. And I'm going to put my x values below, and I'm going to put the signs and 0 of 18x squared minus 17x minus 1 up top. Okay, so I had a negative 1 over 18 and a 1. When x was negative 1 over 18, this quadratic expression was 0. When x was equal to 1, this quadratic expression was 0. And when I look at my original quadratic expression, it's got a lead positive. So I'm going to put the positive here. Right? And then as I move, this is the only time I go right to left. We typically always go left to right, but when I'm putting these sign patterns together, I go right to left. If I'm heading around 1, right, that came from the factor of x minus 1, which had an odd power, so I'm going to alternate, okay? And then as I move this way, negative 1 over 18 came from this factor of 18x plus 1, which also had an odd power, right, odd degree, so it's, again, going to alternate. So if I'm moving this way, it's going to go from negative to positive. So I was alternating the whole way through. And if you don't like that shortcut, right, and my shortcut was lead coefficient is positive, oops, put a scratch mark. Lead coefficient is positive, put the lead positive here. Because both of these factors had odd powers, I alternate around those zeros. And again, if you don't like that, use test points, right? I could have put a 2 in here, right? If I wanted to test out a 2 here, this factor is positive, this factor is positive. Positive times positive is positive, right? I would pick 0 here, right? This factor is positive if x is 0. This factor is negative if x is 0. A positive times a negative is negative. What's a good number over here? Let's go negative 3. Right, anything to the left of negative 1/18. Okay, if x is negative 3, 18 times negative 3 plus 1 is negative. Negative 3 minus 1 is negative. A negative times a negative is a positive. So you can get there either way. And you just find what you're more comfortable with. And then I typically, just to clean up my sign patterns, I usually erase this. You don't have to, but I like to clean my stuff up. Okay, now if I look at this, right, if I had initially solved this, I went, when is 18, x squared minus 17x minus 1 less than 0. So if I want to figure out where this is less than 0, I'm specifically looking for the negatives. And the only negatives I see are right here because I do not have an equals to symbol, right? This is not less than or equal to 0. I'm going to exclude my endpoints with parentheses. So my answer here is going to be any x values between -1/18 and 1. All right, and so that would get me to D as my answer. All right, thanks so much, everyone. Bye.